Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Chase Jarvis. Welcome to another episode of the Chase Jarvis Live Show here on Creative Live. This is where I sit down with the world's top creators, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders, and I do my very best to unpack actionable and valuable insights with the goal of helping you live your dreams in career, in hobby, and in life. My guest today, he is formidable on many, many fronts, in particular industrial design. He led Apple Industrial Design really early on, was a partner at Pentagram, a founder at Ammunition, which is one of the top industrial design firms in the world. My guest, Robert Brunner. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Chase, happy to be here.
All right, so I confess, we dear friends in the camera, we talk a lot before we actually start rolling the cameras, and I'm curious, you started going down a story about how you got started, and we decided to stop talking about it so that you could share it here, but I love the backstory. You know, there's so many of the guests on this show who have had insanely successful careers like yourself, and I think it's hard to believe that you all come from humble beginnings. So can you share that story with us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, my path in design was actually fairly random, which is how things mostly happen. I mean, it actually starts with family. My father was an amazing engineer. He actually invented most of the mechanical technology in hard disk drives at IBM.
Wow.
Yeah, he was a very creative engineer, just constantly working and playing with things. And my mother was a model, a fine artist, a craftsperson, and an entrepreneur. She started her own children's clothing company, so when you kind of marry those things together, what else are you going to do but design? But
That's right.
And our house was like everything was a project. Even the Christmas tree every year was different, right? It was just, there was always a project. So, but when I was in high school, I excelled in math and science, so when it came to that, fateful moment with the career counselor, he said, "Oh yeah, math and science, you're an engineer, right? Like your dad." And but the thing that was interesting, I was actually excelled in art, but also what I really did great in was shop class, right? Making stuff, right? But I studied engineering for a year, and just didn't feel good about it. I did all right, but and I thought I'd rebel against my dad, and I headed over to the art department, thinking I'd study fine art, or I'd heard about graphic design, but. Anyway, I literally walked in the building and there was this display case full of industrial design artifacts, renderings and models. And I stood there for I don't know how long staring at it, and I just said, "This is it, right? This is what I should do."
Literally when you walk in the building?
Literally, and I often say this, what if I went in another door, right? I'd probably be a starving sculptor at this point or something, But that's how I stumbled into design, and then I never looked back. I mean, it always sort of, everything fell into place, and it was kind of what it was meant to do, and it's never actually been a job. It's just always fun.
Well, you've said several things in there that I think are intriguing. One, that you had a mother who you categorized more, I felt you were talking about her more as an artist, and dad as an engineer, but I love that you said a very creative engineer. Yeah. I believe that there's creativity in every person, and you clearly, you said that either under your breath, or I don't know if it was intentional. Was there tension? Did it feel like you had art and science on one? Like if you go to mom for one thing and dad for another?
Everything. My dad. If he wasn't working on something for his profession out in the garage, even building a pair of shelves, he built 2 boats and a canoe, and that was just what I lived in, right? Yeah. And so just making stuff and figuring it out, and you don't realize it until you look back. To me, I was just a kid, and that's what I did, right?
And now dad's in the garage again.
Yeah, and I'm out there helping him or doing whatever, but you absorb that stuff, and later on you realize that, I'm basically a project junkie. It doesn't matter whether it's designing a product or cooking a meal, right? It's always a process, and with a result, right? And that's but you get that out of your upbringings. And
then when you another pivotal moment in your story that I was just hearing was you rebelled against your father. So was there a plan in the family for you prior to you going to school, and was it destiny that you were going to be an engineer?
But he loved it that I was studying engineering, and he would help me with my calculus homework and stuff. And but he didn't like it when I went into design. In fact, I remember him saying about industrial designers is he said, those are the guys that spec the paint and it usually peels off. Was what he had said, right? So, and that, he just didn't think very highly of industrial. He was in that sense a very old school engineer, right? They were the guys who put the racing stripes on at the end. Was kind of the way he looked at it.
Yeah. Well, how do you think that's changed to today? I mean, I think there's this, there's still a tension, not unlike there may have been at your house or with your parents or with you and your dad, but they coexist. So how do you think about it today?
Well, there is always a tension when it comes to the making of things with the disciplines and everyone has to do. I mean, what's become much better understood is this notion of being design driven. And that's not necessarily that designers are in charge all the way. It's the fact that you're trying to achieve a design and everybody plays a role in that design. And so when you're a true design-driven company like Apple or Nike or others, you're starting with an end result or an end experience, and then figuring out all the things that people need to do to deliver that in a really amazing way. That's a very different mentality. The old school mentality of my dad was that design is a little piece that happened, right? And requirements went in and stuff went out, and then they went away, right? That
was like the black box, right?
So that's been a big change. But I think that probably in the last 10 years, I mean, actually one of the reasons why I started Ammunition was I felt the rising importance of industrial design and product design, moving up in the sort of strategy chain at a high level, and that's why I wanted to build a company that really focused on that idea, and it was a change from thinking about design as just part of the process to thinking design as a strategic asset that to be good at it was very important. More and more companies and leaders began to realize that, and that opened up a lot of opportunities for people with me with companies like mine.
Talking about leaders, going back to your past a little bit, long stint at Apple.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. That was at a really fascinating time in the company, and obviously Steve is the founder. Stephen was talk to me about that. I think that's something that people both romanticize and are terrified by. Starting a company, have it being so successful, but all of the ups and downs that are in a startup, but having a role in a company so early that is today the most valuable company in the world. There's all kinds of I think interesting facets to that. Can you give me a perspective?
Yeah. I was actually at a challenging period in Apple's history. When the company had real business challenges, and it actually at the time, design was important, but it was sort of being questioned at that time. So it was very interesting. I mean, I went to Apple. I actually had my own company. With a couple guys called Lunar Design, and I had
that was here in San Francisco.
They're still around, and I started working with Apple through a relationship we had with someone who originally hired us under the umbrella of engineering, simply
to do some racing stripes.
Well, no, simply because they were at the end of a relationship with Frog Design, and they'd had a very tight contract with exclusivity, so they couldn't really hire industrial designers, so they hired us as engineers. But they were really sort of probing to see what we were about, and apparently we were successful because we started doing more work, and then I got approached to be the director of the industrial design function, and I originally said no, right? And
these are the stories that are juicy.
Well,
I love it.
It was interesting because at the time, the way it worked at Apple was the vast majority of the work happened outside with firms like Frog and myself and others, and there was a relatively small group inside managing them. And they were in the process of looking for a replacement for Frog, like some big, personality to fill Hartmut Esslinger's shoes. And I just didn't want to be a cog in that. That just wasn't what I wanted to do as a professional and a creative person. I like to make stuff, like I said. So I said no. I don't want to do that. And they went away and came back like 3 months later and said, well, we really like you. What would you want to do? Which was interesting. I didn't plan it this way, but I realized that there's sort of sometimes the power of saying no. It was a good lesson. And I said, if any company could have a world-class design organization, this would be it. So I'll do that, build that. And they said, okay. And so,
And then you're like, oh, damn,
yeah,
I got what I asked
well,
for.
you know, I remember telling when I told my business partners at Lunar, which was one of the harder things I had to do. I remember saying, you know, I'm young enough to make a really big mistake and recover, right? So now's the time to do something like this, make a big shift. And but it was worth it. Those like 8 years were incredibly valuable from an experience point of view, being inside a company, obviously working with one of the great design companies in the world, you know, knowing what it's like to actually make things happen in an organization like that is super valuable. And then the relationships, you know, the people you work with and I continue to work with today.
Yeah, those never go away.
Yeah.
Well, you talked about it, I was curious, you talked about it just now in a sense of it sort of was one of the great design companies, but didn't you help make it a great design company? Or did you feel like that was already embedded and you mentioned it being in a period of struggle?
Yeah.
Like where in the, like what inflections were happening at the time?
Well, you know, one of my long-running jokes I tell is I was between jobs, right? So
literally.
literally Steve Jobs had left, I don't know, not too long before I came. I did my tenure and then he came back not too long after I left. And, you know, so the company had design in its culture, right? There was an embedded idea that care would be taken in how things were crafted and presented, right? But as the company grew, there was an influx of people from other cultures, like Hewlett Packard and Sun Microsystems, and companies that didn't really have that in their DNA.
Pepsi.
yeah. Actually, I worked quite a bit with John, and he had it in his DNA though. But it was under challenge, and you know, but I think the thing that you know I was most responsible for doing was sort of building starting out this in-house team and culture and studio, you know, because it really didn't exist. There really wasn't even a physical studio. You know, I remember when I first went there, I got really depressed because I ended up in this like 8x12, you know, cubicle with beige walls, you know, that were
Yes.
5 feet tall.
Ones that terrify
I'm just like,
people.
what have I done, you know? But, you know, I quickly learned how to work the system and managed to get my own building and kind
Your
of...
own building?
Well,
not like a better corner office.
Well, no, just get
I
a building
figured it
where
out.
we could have a studio, right? And,
Yep.
and you know, I think I've always excelled under the this sort of idea of don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness kind of thing, and managed to make some things happen and get this set up and organizationally get the group positioned in the right place, and then begin to attract and hire talent, and you know, sort of, you know, I'd built. You know, one studio prior to that, and then since then now this is my fourth studio I've built, so I've kind of learned how to do that.
Yeah.
And anyway, but that I think, you know, from the legacy point of view, you know, I would never, you know, take credit for the work that those guys have done over the last, you know, it's been 20 years, it's amazing. But I think a lot of the guys that I helped bring on board are still there and sort of set this idea of really ownership of the design agenda, and obviously they've taken that to the new levels. So I think that's probably my biggest contribution there.
Well, this is our first time meeting, and I've done research on you. You've been an inspirational character. I know a little bit about the history of Apple, and I think you're being so modest around setting the culture. I think that's huge. I mean, among other things, brought in Jony Ive.
Yeah, that's my other joke. That'll be my epitaph. You know, on my tombstone, the man who hired Jony Ive.
But setting the culture, like to me, that is perhaps a bigger contribution than any individual item. Mm-hmm. It's not like you designed the iPod or the mouse, like to put in motion a culture and then go on at a number of other companies like Pentagram and like ammunition to, you know, grow world-class organizations. That doesn't happen on accident. Mm-hmm. So me to you, I look at you as, I give you a lot of credit for that, and I know that the design community does as well.
Well, you know, I think it's building a team and an environment to do great work is not a simple thing, and it's not straightforward, and it's not always intuitive.
Yeah.
How you do that and how you build a climate where people feel enabled and empowered to do things and somewhat protected, but still accountable for the work. You know, all these sort of dynamics that go into building a really great creative studio, in addition to just talent and tools and things that And and I think that's very important. I work with a lot of companies now who want to build a creative discipline within their company, and it's hard for them to understand. It's not just a question of hiring some good people and putting them in a cool space and throwing some projects at them. It's really the makeup and the culture and the ideas, and again, and design is something that does need to be protected in a way. One of the challenges when I went to a corporation was that you're constantly bombarded by people, wanting stuff or wanting to tell you what they think you should do or participate in their particular process. And so by the end of the day, out of your 8 to 10 hours, you've managed to spend one actually being creative. So you have to build up an environment where people can have good time to really focus on things and have the ability on a project to experiment and test and fail and do those things that, without it, you'll end up you may have really great talent, but just still do mediocre work because you don't have the right environment.
Well, that is part of the mission of this show, is there are so many business leaders that are looking to get inspired. I talk about creativity being the new literacy, and if you want to build a great culture, a great design culture, whether it's a massive company like the ones we're talking about, or in a startup world like here at Creative Live, in particular, what advice would you give to a business leader who wants this? I think you just talked about it very generally, but I think that is a thing that leaders want to know. And if you're in an enterprise environment, what should you look for? What are specific things? You said it's not just a space and a bunch of talented people. How do you cultivate the things? So you're not just working creatively for an hour. Let's get tactical for a second.
Yeah, there was a simple answer to that. It's complex, but as I said, there's of course there's talent, right? And within that talent is the leadership is really important. The leadership you bring on to drive and build that. There is of course environment, right, and the right kind of space to work in. I mean, people. That's something I guess I don't thrive in spaces with low ceilings, right? It's just it has to be an open environment. There has to be a dynamic quality. It has to aesthetically inspire me to do more. Those are very important. Then culture is sort of building this idea of what's important and what matters. And I think one of the hardest things for people to understand and most difficult things for people to do is a great design studio will always have an editorial viewpoint, right? That is, and in our business, we work with a variety of companies, and we don't force feed one approach to them that's our own, right? We work and work very hard to understand what people are about, what do they need to do, and so forth. But we always bring an editorial viewpoint, right? It's so there's this idea of what we believe is good and what we believe is important and what we believe matters. We always bring to that, and that's important, right? Because otherwise, you don't have that sort of way to navigate through difficult, complex decisions. And so those are some things you absolutely have to have, and it's. But I always like to say if it was easy, everybody would do it. Right?
Yeah,
so
it's true. To that end, I'm going to just one more follow-up question around that. Just thinking if there are business leaders out there, and then we'll maybe flip it and go to the side of the creator, how do you be successful as an individual? But from the other way, what role do you think design plays in the building of a product? Because products are usually introduced as a business challenge. We want to make a music player. We want to, create the best experience around X, Y, or Z. And there's some people thinking that, the world needs one of these. And we said, with Creative Live, we have the opportunity to do X, Y, and Z. And then if you go to designing it, what role do you feel like it plays in the modern contemporary business world?
Yeah, that's one I have a very easy answer to. It's right that the way that I think the business leadership needs to look at design is that design is the interface plane between you and the outside world, right? It is the way that people understand and relate to your company, whether that's through your product, whether it's through your service, whether that's through any aspect you put out in the world. The thing that's interesting is if any company in the world that's making something or delivering something to an audience is designing, right?
Yep.
They may have no idea that they're designing and no idea what they're doing, but they're creating stuff that says things about them, that engages people in good or bad ways, and fulfills their lives in good or doesn't, right?
Yeah.
So that's what's happening. The important thing is you're very cognizant of it, and the way to look at it is, we're creating this interface plane between us, the company, and our constituents. So you better do that right, and better do that well. The second part of that that's incredibly important that I find people to understand is how that relates to the idea of a brand, right? And to me, I say this a lot, I've been saying it for years, I think the idea of brand is really misunderstood, right? Because people tend to...
Break it down for us, let's go.
Well, people tend to, and in my profession as well, tend to look at the idea of a company's brand more around the artifacts that we create, right? The product, the identity, the package, the retail environment, the web experience, the application, all those things, right? None of those are your brand. Really what your brand is a feeling that people have about you when they experience that stuff, right? And they own it, you don't own it, they own it. So the best you can do is influence it, right? And influence it in a way that's meaningful and authentic. So, when you go out, then obviously design becomes very important, right? The design has to be able to take those things that you do, which are valuable and good, and people want to be involved with, and deliver it to them, so that you can create these good feelings, right? And I always say, when two people have the same gut feeling about you, you have a brand, right? And that's the way you have to look at it. So when you're thinking about, business leader, when you're thinking about investing in design, you're really investing in your relationship with the rest of the world. And you should look at the companies that are very good at it and break it down that way and start to see the things that they do to maintain that relationship with people. Because the better you are at it, that gap between you and those people shrinks, right? And then you become powerful and charismatic, like Apple, right? So anyway, there's your 5-minute course on design and brand, right?
Well, let's flip the script. I would love some more water if we can get that. I'm chugging my water, but let's flip the script now and go back to the designer, the individual, because there's so many people. I mentioned off screen, we got sort of two audiences: the people who identify as creative and want to take their career to 11, and the people who are basically don't identify as creative, and they're curious. They know that the future of the world has so much creativity in it, and even if you're 5 years ago, everyone needed to learn to code, and now people are saying, wait a minute, actually, AI is going to be able to write code about itself here in the next 5 years. So creativity might be the only thing that saves us.
Yeah.
So how do you think of both? Let's talk about two separate questions here, or your answer would be to two separate questions. One is, if you're a freelancer, how should you look at the world? And the other is, if you want to have be a part of a bigger team and go to a company, how do you look at things like culture and the design community and the products that you're making? Should you go to a place that has crappy products and try and make a huge impact, or do you go to a place that, just let's look at it from both sides,
right,
but from the creative's perspective rather than the business side? Okay.
Well, first I'll give you a bridge from the last question, right? And then another way to look at design, because I and a lot of people in this area, right, live in the world of technology, and there's
we're in San Francisco.
We're in San Francisco,
yes.
So in the Bay Area. And I always say this, that technology, the underpinnings that make things work is extremely important, but it's only an enabler, right? It's the technology enables, but design is what establishes, right? Design is what, and that's what sort of made things about what I do very powerful, is people started to get that. It doesn't matter how amazing the underpinnings are, if people can't have access to it, don't want to have access to it, don't have a desire to be part of it, doesn't matter, right? So as you're as an individual is sort of looking at how do you play in that game, right? Of working to create and build things that bring that, bring it out into the world, and what do you do to contribute to that in a way that's meaningful, and it is challenging. So again, back to here in the Bay Area, it's being a designer. It's a great place to be, but it's extremely competitive. There's a lot of talent coming from all over the world, wanting to be part of what happens here. And so, what becomes very important, people always ask me, well, what do I need to do to get a job? What do I need to put in my portfolio? I mean, you have to be real and be yourself, but I think the most important thing is showing how through your talents and viewpoint you can shape something in a way that appeals to the human, right? That captures the human. We get very caught up in, the way the software works, or the way the hardware works, or this amazing display, or this, that, and the other thing, right? But those are, again, only underpinnings. What really matters is what are people doing with it? How are they doing it? How does it engage them? How does it make them feel? Why does it matter, right? That's something. We have a small strategy group at my office.
Within ammunition?
Yeah, within ammunition. And strategy is kind of an overblown phrase, but really they have one function, and that is determining what should be designed in the first place. That's their whole charter, is that when we go into something is trying to figure out what's worth designing in the first place. And so bringing that idea of looking at all the things of how do you deliver something great into people's lives, and whether you're a beginning designer, a model maker, sort of how do you play a role in that? Because that's the power of your profession, and so being part of that is extremely important.
And as you're part of a team inside a company, do you, when you're trying to make statements, is that really the thing? You're trying to make statements? Are you trying to be a part of a team? Is it, I think the difference between the independent mindset and the team mindset is, like, if you play a good role in a product and the product fails, it's still a failure. Mm-hmm. And so there's a little bit of a different, I guess maybe that's my question. Is there a little bit of a different mentality when you're, at a company, or for the folks who want to take their career to the next level inside of an ammunition or a Pentagram or some other well-known firm?
Well, I guess if you're talking about participating in something that succeeded or failed, I guess a lot of that does depend on the company culture. One of the things I used to love about the time I was at Apple was that you were allowed to fail, right? At least once, right? More than once, maybe not, but at least once. But as long as you were trying to do something good and amazing, right? And that was always really important. I think that's an important part of a creative culture, that you don't feel like, if I go out on a limb and it blows up in my face, I'm dead, right? Then you're not going to go out on that limb.
Yeah.
But back to sort of how you participate in teams, it kind of depends on that culture too. I have a different. I think even though we are a multidisciplinary company, I think the idea of sort of broad collaboration is highly overrated or misunderstood, right?
Ooh, this is juicy.
Well, there's sort of this notion that a group of, say, 8 people are going to collectively design something great. It's actually kind of rare, right? Because it's really what's important, the kind of collaboration. I mean, we do 2 types of collaboration, because we have the way we look at delivering something, a product, right? There's a lot of things that go into that. It's not just the object. It's how people learn about the object, what happens when they buy it, what's the unboxing like, what happens when I turn it on, what is the interface like, what's it look like, what's it feel, all those things, right? So different people participate in that, and they all have roles, but what I always liked was that there's always someone that's owning part of it, right? And they have the support of their team. It's not some vague sort of ownership. There's somebody, some person who's putting themselves on the line with an idea they have and pushing that through. And because I'm a big believer in the human condition and the need to make an impact and ownership of stuff. I think that's when you see the guy that's at our studio there at 3 a.m., it's because he's got something in his head that he thinks is going to be amazing, and he's going to put the time in to do that and make it happen.
With clear ownership.
Yeah, and they've got my support and the support of our team to go do that, right? And we're going to help you and help you, figure out what's wrong and write about it and deliver it. Right? That's the kind of collaboration I think that leads to really great work.
What about on the freelance side? There's so many folks out there. One of the reasons that Creative Live exists is to help people live that dream. And now, I heard some data. Again, I am a self-identified creative. It's the only job I've ever had. Creating Creative Live was very opportunistic, and it's been one of the most amazing journeys of my life. But I've learned to like value data, and one of the pieces of data that I think is impressive is there's going to be 53 million Americans who are going to have a side hustle by 2020, and a lot of those are in these creative fields. Because there's the history of the portfolio rather than school. There's the history of, or the new history, I guess, recent history of the role that design and creativity is playing to unlock all kinds of challenges. So, what do you see for the freelancer, and you know, how do you guys use them as ammunition, and conceptually, how should folks be thinking about their careers?
Well, it's an interesting question. I can only answer it from how we view it, as you said. You know, because I mean, we really don't hire freelance people to come in and work as part of the team on a project. It's really difficult to do, to bring someone in and expect them to be up to speed and understand how we work and what we do and be effective.
Part of the culture immediately. And
What we do hire outside people a lot is, first, they're known to do something very well, right? And whether that's a model maker, a photographer, an illustrator, a CAD sculptor, we just know this guy's amazing, and we're going to use him because we'll get an amazing result out of it. So I think that's the way I tend to look at being successful in the freelance world, is almost this really uber specialization of just doing some part of the process so well, right?
Yeah,
that you're just in demand, right? And so photographers, I mean, that's why, you know, people are recognized for their work, and it's kind of similar with different aspects of what we do. And we have a group of, I don't know, maybe a dozen or so individuals that we know if we can get their time, they can come in and really contribute for a very short period or about a really specific deliverable, something amazing. Yeah. And I think that those guys are always busy.
Yeah. I'm a huge advocate of that, about what can you be world class at, such that if someone has a problem, that you pop into their mind in whatever scale. If it's the middle of Ohio, you're the best person in Cincinnati at this particular thing,
and it can be very narrow. I mean, like, there are guys who work with that do 3D development that are particularly good at a certain type of surface, right? And you're just like, I want to get that guy in because he can build this better than I ever could, right? And that's again, that person is in high demand because they can do something nobody else can. Yeah.
But there's something also interesting about if you are in pursuit of that as an independent, and if you can achieve it. One of the things that I've prescribed, and I'd like to get your take on this, is the concept of mastery. If you've mastered something, and you develop a reputation for being a master of that thing, and whether you get hired by ammunition or in the freelance capacity that we're talking about, that it actually helps you be better at learning other things. And some of the best people that I know are multi-talented. It's because they cracked one nut, they lived it, they felt like what that felt like to master something, and they say, how did I do that? Oh, I worked under the right people, or I put myself out there, I took risks here, and here. I think there's a little bit of a pattern to success. Give me your take on that.
No, I think it's absolutely true. I think as you grow in your career and your discipline, and you get good at something, you realize there's two parts to it. There's the actual thing you're doing, but then there's the way you went about it, right? Almost to a fault. I find this, I drive my wife crazy because I have a way of doing things, and I start to apply it to everything, right?
And in life, like setting the table.
Yeah, exactly. Right, there's an order we need to go through here, right? And shut up. But no, I think you're absolutely right. I think you begin to, as you gain experience, realize that, hey, I'm just, in addition to I'm good at this thing, whether it's illustration, I'm actually good at thinking through how to actually solve this particular problem, that I can apply that on other problems, and then you start to do that, right? And I think that's how you see a lot of people pivot in their careers, is they've been doing something, and then it's actually, my wife's a great story of that. She's a fashion designer, has started her own eco label called Piece by Piece, where she would collect discarded fabric samples and put them together and make them into things, but she found it really challenging to make and sell them because they're very hard to make, and then she had very expensive garments made out of scraps. But through that process, she started experimenting with natural dyes. I mean, literally like rust and whatever, avocado shells or whatever else she could dig up.
Wow.
And she became so good at that, she's completely moved her career in that path. So now she's a textile artist, right? Because she, through this process, learned on something else and got good at that. And and I think that's the way a lot of people change their career direction, is sort of figuring out, hey, I'm good at something and I'm going to build on that into something else.
But it's like pulling on a string, right?
Yeah.
It's like you're not trying to
pull. Labels piece by piece, by the way. It's an unbiased plug, so I'm not gonna
take it.
Is
it PEACE?
No, PIECE.
Okay.
X PIECE.
Got it. Because you said it was eco, it could be peace.
Yeah.
I mean, we are in San Francisco. No, I'll check it out. That sounds fascinating. And I think that her story is also can be inspirational, because they're like, oh my God, I'm getting started, or what do I do? Well, you do the thing that you love, that you're called to do, and you do that very deeply. And is it a miss if you then get pulled onto something else? No, that's actually the point. It's like experimenting or trying or familiarizing yourself. I think it's the way that life happens.
Yeah.
Especially following creative pursuits. I started out as an oil painter.
Mm-hmm.
They were too slow. Mm-hmm. to the point of boring, like you'd have to paint them and then walk away for a couple of days. Yeah. And then I moved to acrylic because it was faster, and then I moved to photography because it was instant.
Yeah.
And all in the same studio over the course of about 4 or 5 years, I made that transition. So, and I don't look at my career as a miss, or I don't think of myself as an oil painter who missed. I think of myself as a photographer now turned entrepreneur. So
that's great.
So we've been a little bit conceptual, and I want to go a little bit more to a timeline, because we talked a little bit about Apple. Then you had some time at Pentagram, where you were a partner.
Yeah.
I know Michael, he's been on the platform, Michael Beirut.
Yeah.
And
I just did a talk at his class in Yale and a podcast with him last week. So,
nice.
Yeah.
I mean, on the podcast circuit now.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that time, and how, was it influential to your career? Do you feel like, what are some of the projects that stood out there? And
yeah, it was an amazing time. It was 10 years, and I was, it was interesting. My viewpoint on Pentagram was probably different than most people. Most people view the great graphic design icons as of the partnership.
Books and posters and
But when I was in school, I stumbled on a book of Kenneth Grange's work. Kenneth Grange was one of the original 5 as an industrial designer, which I was incredibly inspired by, especially his work he'd done for Kenwood appliances and Kodak. And so that was kind of my framework when I was originally approached, to potentially join the partnership. Was that foundation of Kenneth Grange, and it was an amazing time. I mean, it was, I don't know how much people know about Pentagram, but the structure of the company is really interesting in that I always say it's more like a law firm than a design firm, in that you have multiple partners, each with their own area of expertise, with their own clients, their own people, and it's almost like you have a bunch of businesses within a business, and under this umbrella of structure and brand, and it's great, and amazing people. Working with Michael, who's still a great friend, Paula Scher, who's just amazing designer and amazing friend, and a variety of other people. Are just that experience of working closely with those guys and seeing how they work, and then the type of clients that the company attracts. So I was working on my own things for a lot of technology companies, but also working with United Airlines and UPS, and yeah, exactly. They fell away from the work that we did, but and so getting that broad experience working on these huge multinational, worldwide projects was really incredible.
How about New York versus San Francisco?
Well, it was, at the time, I think really, I mean, with all due respect to my pals in London, New York was kind of the center of the company, really, with what Michael and Paula and Michael Garricky and others were doing in that office, and so San Francisco.
I love that space.
Oh yeah,
it's such a cool space.
They're just moving out of it just this week.
Dagger.
Yeah. It was an old bank. They were stuffing people downstairs in the vault, and I think that's when they decided it was probably needed more space.
Time to grow.
No, it was kind of interesting. But San Francisco was always a little bit of an outpost. In fact, it was always about London and New York largely. Then there was San Francisco, Austin, and Berlin, which were always a little bit of an outpost. And I mean, actually, one of the things that led me to leaving the company was that I was, because I was the only person in the company doing what I do, the collaboration wasn't happening in the way that I wanted to. And then I was seeing what was going on in product design and started to realize it may not be the best platform going forward. And so I resigned, which was shocked everyone because I think only one other partner had ever resigned.
That's the Everest of design.
Yeah, you're either kicked out or you die. That's really it. It's true.
It's probably one of the if not the top, one of the top firms ever to be in business.
But we were all good friends, and since what I was doing was unique, it was I couldn't really pass on my clients or my people or anything, and so it was really amicable, and people understood what I wanted to do.
Clearly, if you've just come from spending time with Michael, it went okay.
Yeah, no, but it was, like I said, just actually the best, other than the partner meetings, which were always amazing. Every 6 months we had a meeting some amazing part of the world, which was great because it's almost like you have this. When you're busy, you don't always take vacations, right? So then every 6 months you're forced to go to like southern Italy and spend a week.
Yeah.
That was great, but really it was the individuals and the amazing talent and personality and drive that they had was just really inspirational for me.
Well, clearly it played a role in ammunition because you went out on your own. Mm-hmm. And talk to me about forming that. Yeah,
that was. As I said, I was at Pentagram and doing fine, but just like feeling like something wasn't quite right. And then I could see what was happening in industrial design and kind of felt like I'm over on top of this other mountain, like waving my hand, saying, "Come, hey, look, I'm over here." And this idea began to form that was actually interesting, not that different than Pentagram, but with a significant difference. And that was, I felt like I really believed in the idea of multiple design disciplines working together, but with the product as a focus, right? And sort of really, it's like everything you need to do to make a really great product and experience. And that involves, of course, industrial design, but also visual design and design strategy and UI and user experience and packaging. And those are all the things, it's not a laundry list. It's just what you need to do. And so that was one of the impetuses. The other was that I had this epiphany when I was at Pentagram that as designers, we give away intellectual property really cheaply, right? If you think of design, the things you create, it's no different than code or schematics, right? You're creating intellectual property, but as designers, we're kind of happy to, if it's a good project and we get paid reasonably, we're kind of happy to just like, okay, here you go.
See it out in the world.
Yeah. And then you see it out in the world, doing amazing things. So I wanted to experiment with different business models to participate more in that. But interesting, I was still, so I got married, and I was trying to decide what to do, and I was on my honeymoon with my wife in Nicaragua, and we're sitting on the beach, and I was complaining about it and whining, and she just kind of turned to me and said, "Why don't you just go start it and do it and stop, just stop whining and go do that," right? And so I came back, and like a week later, tendered my resignation. But that was really the idea around ammunition, was that we sort of build this team that's sort of with the product at center and start to experiment with participating with companies in different ways. So today, we have about, we do a lot of work with sort of traditional, which is, contract, fee for service kind of stuff. But then we do a lot of work that is for equity and revenue sharing, and we have about, I don't know, somewhere around 40 companies in our portfolio that we have ownership in, or we're, sharing revenue with, and it's just it took a while to figure it out, and how to do that, and how to do it, within the company under different business models. But the interesting thing we found, beyond the obvious economic potential, it actually made us better designers, right? The way that when we were engaged with a company or a startup or an individual on a sort of partnership level, a couple of things happen. One, you're obviously more vested because you want the thing to be successful, but also you're respected more, right? When you're there sitting around the table and you've got skin in the game with everybody else, well, they listen to you more, right? You're no longer the hired gun. You're a partner, and so it's actually, like I said, I think we kind of carry that mindset to everything we do, whether we're just on a traditional contract or not, and we tend to practice a lot of tough love with the people we work with, and really, advising them not just on the things we're creating, but how they're structuring their business and going out in the world. And I actually love it. It's really enjoyable.
Yeah, you've certainly gotten credit for that. I think you had a couple early products. Also, Yves Bahar has been on the show with Fuse, and they've done some ownership things. Is that a model for the future? Or is it a now thing? Or
I think it's a model for the future. I don't know. I mean, it's not for the faint at heart, and it is complex, and you have to be. There's a lot of things that will never reach the potential you'd hoped, and so you have to almost view it as a portfolio in a way. But I think the idea of there's two ideas: designer's entrepreneur. I think is something that's been around for a while, but I think just probably in the last decade that designers are, I don't know whether we're getting smarter or just getting more exposure or better relationships, but we're figuring out how to be successful at that. And the other is just this idea that designers is again not some lower level part of the process. Design is actually an important part of making a business successful, and especially if you're an early stage company and building something that's going to go out in the world. So, you end up at that level where you actually can be really impactful, and I think people know that and understand that. And obviously, he has been very successful in that as well. And it's again this sort of idea that I'm here to work with you. I'm going to work with the CEO and everyone else to figure out what you need to do to be successful, and having that respect returned is I think the future of design.
Great. So I think that's very impactful. Just conceptually think about the role that design played. It went from, especially in the U.S., it was like so secondary a long time ago. It has had more traction in Europe, just culturally, and then here most recently you've seen it. Technology as a lever for getting amazing design out there in the world. Like you said, it's a facilitator. I believe deeply in it as a core pillar of the future. How talk to us about design thinking. I think some firms have sort of tried to put their hooks in as owning that, but design thinking is a process, and back to whether you're a business leader or you're trying to solve a problem with a small team. You gave me your 5-minute lesson earlier on brand. Give me your 5-minute lesson on design thinking.
Oh boy, you don't know what you stepped into.
I don't.
No, I think there's a lot of bullshit in that phrase, to be honest. No, like the idea of design thinking and design process is not a new idea. I had this realization when I first went to Apple. I had to take a total quality management class. They make everybody do this, right? They called it Apple Quality Management. It was the same deal. And I sat there through this 2-day course and realized it was the basic design process I was taught like in the first year of design school, identify the problem, prototype solutions, test prototypes, revise solution, and applying it to not just creation of physical things, whether that's a manufacturing process or, and I realize it's just the way it's problem solving, right? Yeah. And so I think it's absolutely enormously valuable, and it's actually a great way for businesses to work and think. But I think there's been a lot of sort of, people have tried to wrap it up as some sort of mystique around being something that's totally new and innovative, and it's just
just go take freshman level design at any university, right?
Yeah, and think about applying that to different things, right? And it's interesting.
Maybe that's where the magic is. It's applying it to thinking about an organization structure, or not just a product or a design.
Yeah, we have this thing. We're not the only ones that do this, that we call service design, right? And it's really when we're working with a company, it's and starting to look at what they're doing. It's not just, again, the artifact. It's just this whole way. How is this service delivered to people, right? And so you start getting into not just designing things, but designing behaviors and designing communication, and because you're just looking at how do you orchestrate this thing to deliver something really great, right? And so I think so. I remember, I won't name names, I get in trouble, but it was years ago. I was at a cocktail party with one of the leaders of the so-called design thinking movement, and he said something to the effect of, design thinking is too important to be left to designers, right? Meaning, this was MBA territory, right? This was not, and I remember I had to go take a big drink of my white wine and
chug some white wine and go in the corner and have some more cornichon or something.
Exactly. But yeah, I think, again, and I'm not saying it's not valid, it's just it gets kind of overblown, right? I think. But that's it, I think it's also how I view design and how we view our company. We're very much about delivering things as soon as we can. I'm a big believer in getting ideas out into the world as soon as possible. And, and so the idea of years and years of research and white papers and so forth, sort of designing something doesn't fit our model. It's very much identify, develop, make it, see what happens. We're sort of more in the guerrilla warfare area of design.
How do you foster the growth of your employees and the designers that work for you, the creatives? You talk about being multidisciplinary. Do you have a pattern or way of thinking about it?
Yeah, it's actually very challenging for us because we're a relatively small company. We're just under 60 people, right? And we kind of like that size, so there's not a big growth plan. And sort of how do you provide growth for everybody in that is challenging. Well, one thing that we actually realized maybe 5 years ago, maybe a little longer, that we're actually very good at identifying and developing talent. And because it came out of necessity, what began to happen was the salary curve in the Bay Area designers kind of started going through the roof, and driven by Apple and Amazon and Samsung and Google, and those are the companies we're almost effectively competing with the talent.
Yeah.
And I remember we were interviewing trying to find a senior person, and I was interviewing these guys at 8 or 10 years experience, and they and realizing they weren't as good as some of our people that had 2 or 3 years experience, right? And they were asking these enormous salaries, and we began to realize, so what we've always done is we have an internship program, but it's a postgraduate internship, and people work 3, 6, 9, 12 months, and we use it as an extended interview process, and then we identify the ones we think are really good and then invest in them for a year in developing them. And it turns out we're really good at that because we have the majority of our team started out of school and have stayed for a while and grown with the company, and they just understand what we do and how we do it, and are very, very good. And so we really develop people and bring them along and move them from just working initially as an intern, and then participating in programs, then owning a program, then managing other people, then having client relationships, and then just constantly bring people along and through experience and give them more and more difficult things to do. But we have a great team, and I really actually enjoy that part of it, seeing people grow and develop.
Let's get tactical for a second. That was inspiring, and I think I love the idea of talent development, and you realize as a leader that you don't scale, and so it's all about the people that you bring into the company or the project or the vision. Let's go to tactical about you.
Yeah.
Like I hate the word tips or hacks because they both sort of undersell the concept. But what are some habits? Is probably the best word. Do you have some habits? I mean, you joked earlier about you have a way of seeing the world, and you apply that to whether it's cooking a meal or designing a product, or is that a habit that you have, and is it a good habit?
Well, there's some habits. I mean, the part of the cooking story. I mean, I like doing something till I get it right, and figuring out how to make something just right. I just went through a 3-year process of building a house, and I think actually a product designer is probably a contractor's worst nightmare.
I'm in the middle. I just finished. Actually, it's been brutal.
Well, because I'm down in millimeters, right? Just
Yeah.
making sure something is just right, and they're like, "That's not possible." Yes, it is. You're going to do it that way. But I think it is this, the habit that I think is one of the habits that's very valuable to me is that sort of quest to get something just right? And sometimes you have to compromise or give up, but you always have that, right? And I think that's one. The other one that I have, it sometimes drives my team crazy, is I like to explore pretty broadly before we focus in on something. And I don't know what it is. It may be some sort of insecurity on my part that I've tested everything to know that idea I thought was right in the first place is actually right? But you know, to go, so I'll always make the guys let's develop some more concepts. Let's play with this one some more. And so, but I think for me it is important, because then when it gets to the point where we're telling someone this is what you should do, I feel like
I've sufficiently explored.
I've looked at everything else, and and I think this is absolutely the right thing to do. And ironically, a lot of times does go back to that second or third idea, the first idea you had.
But it's also that it allows you to have confidence in the idea that you're putting forward. It's because you've actually looked around, you looked under some stuff, and you didn't find better ideas. I think that's actually a common pattern, having lived a life as a professional creator my whole life, and then sat here and had so many friends that were top performers. I think like figuring out that what you have is actually a good thing, and by doing a lot of research, and whether you call it research or something else, ultimately you're making sure that you're validating or further validating that you're sinking your energy into the right thing.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I think I regularly will tell students, people that I think are important. One is that I think really gets overlooked in design school, and that is your ability to communicate about your work. Sometimes the difference is, and it may fall over into selling, but really it is sort of being able to clearly articulate an idea in an inspiring way to someone, And I mean, how many times I'll work with some of our younger people, and I say, okay, here's your chance, you get to talk about your work, and they'll just start talking about the details and this and that, and stuff that's important to them, but it's sort of, no, you need to start off with, what's the big idea? What's the purpose? How is this doing it? How, it's really, and that is something that comes with experience, but I think it gets overlooked quite a bit, that ability to communicate about things, both verbal and written. Yeah,
that's one of the things that at Creative Live we're being asked to do a lot. There's design schools that we're talking to, and they're thinking, oh my gosh, our people can't make a living, they can't communicate about their work. My background is in philosophy, so it's like thinking big about how to connect unlikely ideas and talk about it. And I find the emotional intelligence, the ability to present, the ability to believe in an idea, even things like body language and positioning, like in a business world, because what you're really doing is solving a problem. So without being able to put your solution in the context of the problem, you've really taken a lot of power out of the solution.
Yeah.
No. You feel like that's a major miss from design school? And
yeah, I think so. And I think I always say you need to learn how to tell a story. People love stories, right? People love a beginning, a middle, and an end, and getting there and taking people along this journey, right?
Yeah.
And it's an important part of again, if you get to a certain level, right, you're not doing something alone, right? I'm not just doing everything. There's a little
you're not in your garage anymore.
So you have to be able to get people to follow what you want to do, and those sometimes are the people that work for you, sometimes they're the people that you're working with to make something. So you have to be able to figure out how to get them behind, especially if you're going to do something hard.
Yeah.
Right? If you're going to do something hard that requires some people to put in extra time or do things they haven't done before or take some risks, you're going to have to get them inspired about it and figuring out how to do that.
How do you do that? How do you get people to do that? Your younger people, clearly you gave a scenario where they might have stumbled and just got into the weeds a little quickly. So how do you coach them?
Yeah, a lot is, when you give them the opportunity, you give them a little bit of rope. Not enough to hang themselves, but a little bit of rope.
Rope burn.
And then, afterwards you sit down and said, okay, here's what you did good. Think about this next time, because, you went right down into the weeds and lost everybody after 2 minutes. Okay, so it's stuff like that, just really sort of coaching and getting people to understand. But again, it has to come through experience. It just doesn't. When I first started, I was deathly afraid of speaking in front of crowds or doing anything like this. I just had to really force myself to get good at it, because I realized, this is.
It's a part of the profession.
Yeah, if I want to do this is going to be part of my job. So I better figure out how to be better at it. So.
personal habits continued? Like, do you have any routines that you do in the morning, noon, or night? Do you have some any superstitions about how to design, where to start? You start at the end and then work backwards, or you wake up at 2 a.m. and do yoga? Like, get real tactical. Weird
I don't know. Weird things.
What's weird about you, Robert?
What's weird about me? I don't know. I'm actually probably a boring, normal person. You know, I don't know. I just get, and you'd probably be good to ask my wife that question, but I get obsessed with stuff, right? And and again, to my detriment, right? My kids will be screaming and crying or whatever, and I'm just like, no, fuck, I gotta get this. I gotta figure out how to make this router work, right? I'm gonna forget about anything else. I'm gonna focus on this.
Diapers.
I'm gonna, you know, and but yeah, I get obsessed with things. The other thing, I really wish I had the discipline to like do a sketchbook and stuff like that. You know, people always have these great books and they show you all these things. Right? I have this habit of just whatever scrap of paper and writing implement is available, I grab. I mean, I've literally done sketches with crayons that happen to be laying around the kitchen because I just had this idea and I've got to put it down on a piece of paper and figure it out. So I think it's another quirk, is it's just like a very, you know, of the moment, like, okay, I got this thing, I got to write it down right now. Then I lose the scrap of paper. You know.
So your sketchbook is a box, right? How about personal professional balance? Can you know, any insight there?
Oh yeah, that's a tough one. So yeah, truth be told,
is that a trick question?
I know. I you know, in the world of design professionals, I'm probably an anomaly. I have a large family. I have 6 kids. Broad range from 30 to 4-year-old twins, right? So I have no choice but then to figure out, and my family's incredibly important to me. It's actually, I draw most of my energy and inspiration from them. So I guess for me, the job will always draw you, right? People will always be putting pressure on you. You'll always have demands. So I know that's there. So I really try to turn a lot of focus on making sure I do spend the time with my family, with my wife and my kids, because that other stuff will always pull me away, right? There's no doubt that magnetism is always there. It's always making sure you find that balance. I do believe in that idea that no one goes to see their maker thinking they'd spent more time at work, right? I do. Yeah. So, because that's actually really easy to do. Yeah. I think so. It just takes work, right, and understanding, and sometimes you can't be there, and that's just the way it is. But you have to spend the focus if you want to have that part of your life.
Do you carve off specific time, like I never go into work before X, or what are some of the tactics?
Well, right now, you know, as I mentioned, we have 4-year-old twins. So
wow.
Yeah, wow. So if I'm not home to help at least a couple nights, so we come in deep trouble anyway. So I gotta, you know, I try to. I take them to school a couple mornings a week when I'm in town, and I you know, again, try and get home early enough to help with dinner and get them in bed and stuff like that. I enjoy it. It's great. You know, you get a lot of, you know, I mean, it's funny. I always, I have, you know, now that I'm not a young guy to be having 4-year-old twins, so I have to keep my energy level high for just a survival thing. So the kids keep you that way.
How important is energy? I find that to be critical, and it's a common theme. You just said it. What about professionally or just in life?
It is energy and excitement. I mean, it's hard to maintain it all the time. You know, there's sometimes you're just like, oh, you know, it's a struggle to just, you know, get. But it is important to have energy, enthusiasm for what you do. That's one thing I was going to say, back to the sort of advice to give people. One thing that I try to make people understand, because a lot of people want to have their own business, start their own thing, like you've done and others, and there's an important thing to realize that you're going to do a hell lot of stuff that you don't like to do or aren't good at. That doesn't involve design.
So true.
Right? So you got to have the stamina and energy and commitment to do that, right? Because you know, I probably spend half of my time, you know, sort of organizing new things to do for the other, you know, 57 people I have to worry about, right?
Yeah.
So those are just things you have to do, and you have to gear up for that and like it and be excited about it. Because if you don't, you won't be successful. So I would say, being in business for yourself, just because you're good at design doesn't mean you're going to be successful in business for yourself. You got to be willing to do all that other stuff that makes the company run in order to do that. And to do that, you got to be excited, because if you don't have that energy, you won't be successful.
Stamina is just so underrated. I feel like it's just an amazing characteristic.
And it ebbs and flows. There's some days, Sarah's sitting over there, she can tell you, some days I come into work like, oh God, do I have to do that,
Yes, you have to. The 4-year-olds kept me up. 4-year-old twins. You look great for having 4-year-old twins.
Yeah.
Robert Brunner, I want to say thank you so much for being on the show. It's inspirational as hell. And good luck. Keep doing what you're doing. We appreciate you.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it, Robert. Signing off. See you again probably tomorrow.